"Get lost, you poor old man." Those were the words that shattered years of sacrifice. In a single moment, love was dismissed, dignity was trampled, and the bond of family was torn apart. What followed was not just heartbreak, but a reckoning, a journey of reclaiming respect, setting boundaries, and discovering what family truly means. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Hector Navarro, and I have lived in Santa Fe my entire life. At 61, I wake each morning in a modest adobe house that looks as if it has been standing against the desert wind forever. The stucco has cracks like wrinkles on a tired face, but it is still strong, still standing, much like me. When the sun rises over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the red glow hits my kitchen window, and the air smells faintly of sawdust and mesquite. My wife, Lucia, used to say mornings here tasted like coffee and wood smoke. 4 years have passed since her sudden stroke, but her presence lingers in every corner of this home. On a shelf above my workbench sits our wedding photo, her smile frozen in time beside the tools I once used to craft furniture for half the town. Life without her has been quieter, narrower. I no longer run a workshop, my back will not let me. Instead, I take small repair jobs for neighbors, mending a chair, sanding down a warped table. It is not about money so much as purpose. Each morning I walk down to La Fonda Cafe for a black coffee, exchange a few words with old friends, and then return to tinker until afternoon. Twice a week, I volunteer at St. Francis Church, sorting canned food and helping load boxes of donations for families in need. That work keeps me connected to people who value me for more than my wallet, though lately I have allowed my wallet to do most of my talking with family. My only child, Ethan, is 33. He once followed me around job sites, measuring planks with an oversized ruler and asking if wood had a heartbeat. I thought he might inherit my patience for building, but he dreamed bigger. He wanted to design, not just hammer and saw. He married Brooke Campbell, a woman whose sharp eyes can scan a room and find everything ordinary. To her, beauty is a carefully staged picture for strangers online. She calls herself a curator of style, posting photos of interiors to thousands of followers. I never begrudged her ambition, but I felt the shift the day Ethan tied his future to hers. He stopped speaking the language of sawdust and nails and began speaking the language of projects, deals, and networks. Brooke's parents, Richard and Lillian, belong to the Santa Fe Country Club set. They host tastings, wear polished smiles, and greet me as though I am the hired help who forgot to wipe his boots. They measure worth in vintages of wine and fluency in French. I measure worth in hours bent over a workbench, and that is a currency they neither respect nor understand. I suspect they never wanted me around much, but it is Brooke who has made sure I stand outside the warm circle. Still, I have given, more than I ever believed I could. 5 years ago, when Ethan and Brooke bought their house in Arroyo Vista, I wrote a check from my 401k for $39,000 to cover the down payment. I told myself it was an investment in my son's stability, though it emptied my savings meant for retirement. Then came the monthly mortgage payments, $2,650 every month without fail. I set up an automatic transfer, watching my account bleed while theirs flourished. Over 60 months, it added up to more than $150,000. That number floats in my head like a ghost, whispering what else it could have meant. Security, travel, maybe just peace of mind. The spending did not stop there. Brooke insisted on quartz countertops, $12,500 charged to my account. A new living room set, $6,800 more. Even their homeowners association dues, a steady $185, often fell to me when cash flow was tight. I tightened my belt, bought beans in bulk, and skipped new shoes while they hosted friends on imported rugs. I tell myself I do it because family comes first. That belief has been the backbone of my life, drilled into me by my parents and reinforced every Sunday at church. Lucia believed it too. She often reminded me that sacrifice was another word for love, yet she also left me with a warning I did not heed enough. Hector, boundaries are love spoken in a grown man's grammar. I hear her voice most nights when the house is silent. I wonder if she would frown at what I have allowed Ethan and Brooke to demand. Photos around their home tell a story more clearly than words. In the earliest pictures, I am there at Ethan's side, smiling with a hammer in hand. As the years go by, I shift toward the edges, smaller, dimmer, until, in the most recent family photo, I stand half-cropped, as if already fading out. It is a quiet kind of exile, captured in frames meant to preserve love. Santa Fe prepares for winter in its own way. Snow dusts the adobe rooftops, the mountains glow pale blue in the distance, and lights are strung along canyon road galleries. In Ethan's neighborhood, houses shine with synchronized displays, expensive SUVs parked like trophies. I drive past sometimes and feel the weight of the divide. My house is smaller, plainer, yet more honest. It holds me without condition, unlike the house my son occupies, which only welcomes me when my money fills its corners. I hold to the hope, fragile as it is, that Ethan will one day look back and see the cost of my love not in dollars but in years of work. For now, I continue the routine, balancing coffee, odd jobs, and the silent companionship of a woman gone too soon. Yet beneath the calm of my days, tension builds like a crack running along the grain of wood, small, invisible at first, but ready to split wide with the right pressure. If you're still watching and feeling the sting of those first words, comment number 1 below to show you're with me. Now, let's move forward to see what happened next. December carries a sharpness in Santa Fe that cuts deeper than the air itself. The mornings are bright but brittle, the desert winds scraping across adobe walls until they whistle through the smallest cracks. Shops downtown string lights along their portals, Canyon Road glows with candles tucked into brown paper bags, and the church bells of St. Francis ring with promise. Everywhere I walk, I see a town pulling together for warmth. Yet the closer I get to my son's house, the more I feel the cold, as if their walls hold not heat but distance. I had gone there one morning to tighten the stair railing. It was loose enough that I worried someone might stumble, and as always, my instinct was to fix what was broken. Ethan wasn't home, but Brooke was in the kitchen, her voice rising and falling as she spoke on the phone. I paused halfway up the stairs, the sound carrying through the wide-open rooms that gleamed with surfaces I had paid for. She was listing names for their Christmas dinner, clients, a photographer, her parents' friends from the country club. Every name had weight in her world, an audience she wanted to impress. When I stepped into the kitchen, she ended the call quickly, smiling as if she hadn't revealed anything. I asked if she planned to make pozole this year, the way Lucia had every Christmas Eve. The smell of red chile and hominy had been our tradition, a dish that carried love and memory in every spoonful. Brooke adjusted a vase of lilies and shook her head lightly. "We're going for a minimalist menu this year, Hector. Cleaner flavors, more modern. It just suits the vibe." The words slipped under my skin like splinters. Modern, cleaner, as though the food Lucia made, the food we shared with neighbors for decades, was somehow messy or unworthy. I looked at the mixer on the counter, a gleaming appliance I had bought, and realized that everything about this kitchen was curated to look perfect in photographs, not to hold memory. Later, Ethan came home. I tried again, quietly mentioning that I could bring over Lucia's recipe, that I would make it myself. He glanced at the floor, then at Brooke, then back at me. His mouth opened, but no words came. His silence said enough. I let the subject drop, but inside I felt a hollowness grow. While they went about their evening, I noticed the photos lining the hallway. At first, I smiled at the sight of younger versions of us, Ethan with sawdust on his shirt, me teaching him how to measure a board straight. But as I looked at the newer frames, I felt something twist. I was there, but smaller each time, moved to the side, nearly cropped out of the most recent picture. The family I had built with my hands was shrinking around me. I left their house with my tool belt heavier than when I'd arrived. That night, I sat at my own kitchen table with a stack of papers, bank statements, receipts, the familiar line item of $2,650 scheduled to leave my account on the 13th. HOA dues highlighted in yellow, notes scrawled in my own handwriting, down payment, countertops, furniture. Every figure spoke the same truth. My life revolved around financing theirs. Beans simmered on the stove behind me, the scent humble, honest. While across town, my son and his wife prepared for a dinner party with crystal glasses and imported wine. The next day, the phone rang. It was the church asking if I could help deliver gifts to Taos. Without hesitation, I said yes. It felt good to be needed for my presence, not my money. I knew that those families, bundled in coats against the mountain snow, would not care about quartz countertops or hashtags. They would care about whether the gifts arrived on time, whether kindness still existed in this world. As I hung up, I felt a faint stirring of strength, though doubt followed close behind. Lucia's voice echoed in memory, calm and firm. Boundaries are love in a grown man's grammar. I had carried that phrase for years, often ignoring it, often confusing sacrifice with love. But now, sitting in a quiet house, her absence filled with the sound of bills rustling under my fingers, I began to wonder if I had failed to honor her wisdom. The streets outside shimmered with ice where snow had melted and refrozen. As I walked out to fetch the mail, I pressed my boot against a patch of frozen slush. It cracked with a brittle snap, tiny shards scattering. I stood there, staring down at the broken surface, and thought of myself. Pressure always finds the weak spot. Something in my family was straining, and I could feel it splintering beneath me. I didn't know yet what form the break would take, but I knew it was coming. If you're still here and the tension is pulling you in, drop a number 2 in the comments so I know you're following along. Now let's uncover the twist that makes it even worse. Sunday afternoons in Santa Fe often carry a quiet stillness, the kind that makes every sound sharper. That particular December Sunday, the sky had stretched a pale blue over the city, and the snow from 2 nights earlier had begun to freeze into ridges of ice along the curbs. I drove toward Ethan and Brooke's house with no grand purpose in mind. My plan was simple: tighten a hinge on one of their kitchen cabinets and drop off a small wooden ornament I had carved, a little angel with Lucia's initials etched into the base. It was the sort of gesture fathers make without thinking twice. When I arrived, the house looked immaculate as always, the driveway swept, lights strung with symmetry. I noticed my breath in the air before I stepped inside, feeling already that the welcome would be thin. Ethan was in the living room, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, and Brooke leaned casually against the counter, watching me with that same half-smile I had come to recognize. I set my tool belt down and knelt to adjust the cabinet hinge. For a moment, the familiar work steadied me, the turning of a screw reminding me that not everything in life was loose and shifting. Then Ethan spoke, his voice strained. He started with small talk, a comment about the weather, then about the cost of heating. His words faltered like a man circling something he did not want to say. I looked up, meeting his eyes. That was when it came, not shouted, but hurled all the same. "Get lost, you poor old man." The words did not echo, they sank like a stone into my chest. I froze in place, the screwdriver still in my hand, my mind filled with images uninvited. Ethan as a boy, following me with sawdust on his jeans, asking whether wood could breathe. Ethan at 15, proud when we built his first desk together. Ethan holding his college acceptance letter, a future bought in part by the overtime hours I worked. All those moments collapsed under the weight of a sentence I never imagined he could speak. Brooke did not flinch. She stood behind him, silent, almost triumphant, as though she had been waiting for Ethan to finally voice what she had long thought. That silence hurt nearly as much as the words themselves. I looked around the kitchen. The countertops glistened under the pendant lights, paid for with my savings. The polished furniture gleamed, purchased with checks I had written. The tall Christmas tree stood firm in the corner, held upright by a wooden base I had built. The irony pressed in on me. I was surrounded by the very things my labor had made possible, yet I was being dismissed as though I were nothing. I could have shouted back. I could have listed every sacrifice, every dollar, every moment of silence I had endured for their comfort. But years of working with sharp tools had taught me the value of restraint. You never jerked your hand in anger when a blade was near. So instead, I steadied myself, set the screwdriver gently on the counter, and said in the calmest voice I could muster, "Santa Fe nights get cold. Remember to cover the outdoor pipes." Ethan blinked, startled by my composure. He might have expected rage or pleading, but I offered neither. I lifted my tool belt, walked down the hallway past framed photos where my presence had grown smaller over time, and opened the front door. The December air struck me like a slap, but it carried with it a strange relief. I did not look back. Driving home, my thoughts churned. Numbers began to roll through my head unbidden. 2,650 each month, 39,000 from my retirement, 12,500 for countertops, 6,800 for furniture. Each figure was a brick in the wall I had built for them, and now I saw how it trapped me more than it sheltered them. The hurt twisted into clarity. When I entered my house, I unbuckled my tool belt and set it aside on the table, as though laying down an identity I no longer needed to carry for them. I pulled out my ledger, the one where every payment had been neatly recorded. I turned to the last page, the ink smudged from months of anxious handling. For a long moment, I stared at the familiar numbers, the steady bleed of my account. Then I drew a line across the bottom and wrote 3 words in bold, steady letters: "Cancel everything." The act was small, but my hands trembled as though I had lifted something heavy. For the first time in years, I felt a shift inside me, as if a door had opened. I was no longer only the man who gave. I was a man who could take back. The insult had cut me to the bone, but in the wound there was room for something new: resolve. I sat in silence, the house quiet except for the hum of the heater. Outside, the snow cracked beneath the tires of passing cars. I thought of Lucia, of her warning about boundaries, and I felt the truth of her words at last. This was the turning point. My days of silent sacrifice had ended with one cruel sentence. From this night forward, every choice I made would be different. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of this betrayal, type number 3 in the comments to let me know. Now let's see how the first real conflict explodes. The morning after Ethan told me to get lost, I woke in my small adobe house with the taste of those words still raw on my tongue. The desert air that seeped through the cracks in my windows was cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill in my chest. For a while, I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the line I had written in my ledger the night before: "Cancel everything." The words glared back at me like a commandment. I dialed the number for Arroyo Vista Credit Union. The woman on the other end spoke with the detached politeness of someone who spends her days reading from a script. She asked for my account number, my security questions, and then confirmed the standing transfer: $2,650 every month, directed to Ethan and Brooke's mortgage. She asked if I wanted to suspend or cancel. "Cancel," I said. When she repeated the word back, effective immediately, I felt something unlock in me, as if a weight had slipped from my shoulders. Next came Southwest Bank. There were the HOA fees, $185 each cycle, and even a so-called maintenance subscription Brooke had set up, charges I hadn't questioned before. I canceled them all. The silence after I hung up was thick, but it was not empty. It was mine. I spread the folders across the kitchen table. The receipts and statements looked like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to assemble. Mortgage transfers stacked neatly by year, 60 months, each bleeding away $2,650. The down payment, $39,000, withdrawn from the retirement account I once promised would keep Lucia and me secure. Furniture invoices, countertop receipts, HOA notices. A paper map of my slow undoing. Yet, as I arranged them, I felt less like a victim cataloging losses and more like a craftsman preparing blueprints. My phone rang mid-morning. Brooke's name lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice carried no trace of apology. "Hector, my parents are flying in this afternoon. Their Alaska flight lands at 2. You'll need to pick them up and help with the luggage." I almost laughed. Less than 24 hours after her husband had told me I wasn't wanted, she was assigning me errands like I was a hired driver. I asked, "Did you forget our conversation yesterday?" She brushed it aside. "That was just a misunderstanding. But you're the only one available during the day. That's what family does, helps each other." I agreed without hesitation. "Of course," I said. "I'll handle it." and she hung up, satisfied. She never thought to thank me. At 2 o'clock, instead of standing by the baggage carousel, I sat in Camino Cafe with a cinnamon latte warming my hands. Through the window, I watched the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rise like a painting, streaked with snow. My phone vibrated on the table. Brooke, then Ethan, then an unfamiliar number. I turned it face down and took another slow sip. The world did not collapse without me racing to their aid. By the time the sun dipped low, the knocking at my door turned into pounding. I opened it to find Richard and Lillian, faces flushed from anger and cold, Brooke just behind them. They stormed inside without waiting for an invitation. Richard's voice thundered about humiliation, about taxi fares, about connections in the city. Lillian called me barbaric. Brooke spat words about how I had embarrassed them in front of everyone who mattered. I stood by the door, calm. "This is my home," I said. "You need to leave." Richard stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "Do you know who I am? I have friends in this town. I can make life very difficult for you." "Out," I repeated, my voice even. I pointed to the door. For the first time in years, I was not pleading, not explaining, not bending. They sputtered, threatened, swore they would destroy my reputation. But one by one, they turned and left, their words trailing behind them like smoke that quickly vanished in the night air. When the door shut and the lock clicked, the house felt cleaner. I stood in the quiet, breathing deeply. The man who had spent years serving their whims had not shown up at the airport. The man who once reached for his wallets at every complaint had told them to leave his house. It was a small act, perhaps, but to me it felt like the first nail driven into a new frame. As I settled back at the table, the folders of evidence still spread before me, I thought of what Richard had said, about his connections, his threats. They believed they still had power over me. They didn't yet realize that my power was not in who I knew, but in what I could refuse to give. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I had not felt in years: strength. If you're still with me and the struggle feels all too real, write number 4 in the comments to show your support. Now let's dive into what happens when his first efforts fall apart. The morning the storm truly broke began like any other. I brewed coffee, cracked an egg into the pan, and settled at the table with the Santa Fe Gazette. The paper was still cold from the doorstep, its ink fresh enough to smudge my fingers. I turned the pages absently until I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3. For a moment, my heart stopped. There it was, my photograph from an old business directory, grainy and slightly out of date, plastered above a headline that made my stomach clench. Elderly man abandons distinguished couple at airport in freezing conditions. I read the first paragraph twice, not believing the words. According to the article, Richard and Lillian Campbell had been left stranded at Santa Fe Airport for hours during dangerously cold weather. It claimed they had endured severe stress and financial hardship because I, their supposed driver, had failed to appear. The writer described me as erratic and possibly suffering from cognitive decline. Nowhere did it mention Brooke's phone call, the demand made less than a day after Ethan had told me to get lost. Nowhere did it mention the 5 years of checks that kept their house standing. To anyone who didn't know me, the piece painted a clear picture. I was a cruel old man slipping into madness. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. My hands trembled as I set the mug down. I thought of my neighbors, of the people at church, of anyone who might flip through the paper and see me described as heartless. I imagined whispers, side glances, polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. It was humiliation weaponized. Richard's warning about his connections echoed in my ears. He had called in favors, and they had delivered. I folded the paper neatly, forcing my fingers not to tear it. Rage bubbled under the surface, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I walked to the cabinet, pulled down the thick folders I had been assembling, and laid them across the table. The evidence was there. 5 years of bank statements showing automatic transfers, $39,000 yanked from my retirement, $12,500 for countertops, $6,800 for furniture, endless receipts for HOA dues and emergency repairs. If they wanted a story, I had the truth. That afternoon at St. Francis, Father Miguel asked gently if I was doing all right. He didn't mention the paper, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. Others didn't bother with subtlety. Two women I'd known for years turned their heads when I walked by. Another man muttered something I couldn't catch, but the word unstable carried clearly. The sting cut deeper than Ethan's insult had. Being betrayed by my son was one thing. Being shamed before the community I'd served for decades was another. Yet, humiliation hardened into clarity. Lucia's voice rose in memory, calm but firm. Don't shout when you can prove. I clung to that. This wasn't about arguing anymore. It was about evidence. I returned home, spread the receipts across the table, and began to sort them by year, by category. Mortgage transfers in one stack, utilities in another, renovation costs in another. I printed Brooke's social media posts, her photos of their quartz countertops captioned, "So grateful," her pictures of designer furniture flaunted during months when I had quietly paid their bills. Each document became a piece of armor, each receipt a weapon. I wrote dates beside the amounts, building a timeline as precise as any blueprint I had ever drawn. At the top of a page, I wrote in bold letters, December 24th, Justice. Brooke and Ethan planned to host 12 guests that night, clients, friends, her parents' circle. They wanted to showcase their success. Instead, they would see the truth. The irony was almost poetic. They had chosen to shame me in public. They had stripped me of dignity with lies printed in black and white. Now I would answer, not with anger, not with empty words, but with proof. Proof that every inch of their carefully curated life had been built on my back. As the day darkened into evening, I sat at the table, the newspaper folded beside the stacks of evidence. I felt the old ache of betrayal, yes, but alongside it something sharper, cleaner, determination. The man who had been written off as unstable was steadying himself for the fight of his life. I whispered into the quiet room, more to myself than anyone else. They wrote their version of the story. Now they'll hear mine. The days after the article felt like walking through a city that no longer belonged to me. Santa Fe was draped in holiday lights, adobe houses glowing against the snow-dusted streets, but the warmth outside contrasted sharply with the cold that followed me wherever I went. I felt the stares in the grocery store, the hesitation in a neighbor's wave. The article had done its job. Richard Campbell's connections had painted me as unstable, bitter, and cruel. Each night I returned to my kitchen table, the only battlefield I had. The folders I had spread there never moved far. Mortgage statements, credit card slips, HOA notices, photographs pulled from social media. Each page was proof that the story the Campbells had spun was a lie. I sat surrounded by them like a soldier counting ammunition. My ledger lay open to the page where I had scrawled, "Cancel everything." Now I asked myself the heavier question, stay silent or fight back? If I chose silence, the humiliation would fade in time. I could withdraw, let Ethan and Brooke live in the gilded cage I had built for them, and spend my final years alone but unbothered. But the thought of surrender gnawed at me. Silence would mean they had won. It would mean Lucia's memory, her belief in family, had been twisted into something ugly and left unchallenged. I closed my eyes and let memory pull me backward. A Christmas long ago, Lucia in the kitchen, humming as she stirred a pot of pozole, steam rising in fragrant clouds. Ethan was small then, tugging at her apron, and she laughed as she kissed his hair. Later that night, when we were alone, she said to me, "Hector, silence can be mercy, but it can also be surrender." Choose wisely. He hadn't thought of those words in years, but they came back now with the clarity of prophecy. That night I made my choice. I would not be silent. I began assembling 12 identical packets. Each one contained 5 years of mortgage statements, highlighted to show every transfer. Receipts for countertops, furniture, and dues. Screenshots of Brooke's social media posts, her captions dripping with pride over luxuries bought with my sacrifice. And finally, a copy of the newspaper article, annotated in red ink. Beside Richard's claim of freezing weather, I wrote, "Lie." Next to the suggestion of my instability, I marked false, omitted context. It was meticulous, careful, and exact. When the last packet was sealed, I looked at the old carpenter's toolbox in the corner of the room. It was the same box I had once used to carry nails and chisels, the same box that had held the tools I used to build Ethan's first desk. I polished the wood with a rag, then lined the inside with the packets. No nails, no saws, only evidence. The box that had once built was now the box that would dismantle. I felt the symbolism keenly, as though Lucia herself had guided my hands. On the wall calendar, I circled December 24th, twice. Beside it, I wrote one word in bold letters: confrontation. Late one evening, the phone rang. Ethan's voice came through, tight and uncertain. "Dad, are you okay?" After everything that's been going on, there was hesitation in his tone, as if he wanted to bridge the gap but couldn't find the courage. I answered simply, "I'm fine. You'll see me soon enough." I could hear him draw in a breath as though to ask more, but he let it go. The silence between us was heavy before he hung up. That call told me one thing. He knew something was coming, even if he didn't know what. I spent the following nights rehearsing the plan in my mind. I pictured the dining room, Brooke at the head of the table, her parents glowing with smugness, guests laughing, wine glasses raised. And then I pictured myself walking in, toolbox in hand, distributing the packets like communion. No shouting, no anger, just the truth laid bare. The lamplight in my kitchen grew familiar, a companion as I worked. The stacks of paper became more than documents. They became bricks of a new foundation. My grief, my humiliation, my loneliness, all of it transformed into resolve. I was no longer a man bent by sacrifice. I was a craftsman again, designing the most important project of my life. On the final night before Christmas Eve, I closed the toolbox and set it by the door. The latch clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the empty house like a promise. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered city, rooftops glowing beneath strands of colored lights. In the reflection, I saw myself, older, yes, but not broken. "They will never look at me the same way again," I whispered. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. If you're still here and the stakes feel higher than ever, comment number 5 so I know you're locked in. Now, let's witness the critical choice that will change everything. Christmas morning dawned cold and pale, the light slipping gently over the Sangre de Cristo mountains. Santa Fe was quiet, the streets hushed under a thin coat of snow. From my window, I could see smoke rising from chimneys, neighbors gathering around trees, children tugging sleds through the icy patches. Inside my house, silence ruled, but it was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of aftermath. The night before had ended like a storm breaking open. I had walked into Ethan and Brooke's dining room with my old toolbox in hand, and by the time I left, their carefully built facade lay shattered. I could still hear the gasps from their guests as packets slid across the table, the rustle of papers being flipped through, the stunned silence when dollar amounts came to light. I remembered Brooke's brittle laugh, her desperate insistence that it was all a misunderstanding. I remembered Richard's face flushing deep red as he shouted about respect and family honor. I remembered Lillian trying to hush the room, her voice trembling. And I remembered Ethan, frozen, pale, saying nothing at all. I had left calmly, the sound of voices rising behind me. There had been no need to stay. My truth was already out in the open. Now, on Christmas morning, I sat at my own table, sipping coffee and letting the warmth seep into my hands. For the first time in years, I felt dignity settle over me like a blanket. By mid-morning, the phone began to buzz. Neighbors, friends, even acquaintances I barely knew had heard whispers about what happened. Some who had read the newspaper article now questioned its accuracy. One guest from the dinner, apparently appalled by what they had seen, had spoken to a local blogger. By noon, an article was circulating online titled, "The Other Side of the Campbell Story." It laid out the pattern of my financial support and how the Campbells had spun their narrative for sympathy. For the first time, the tide began to turn. At the grocery store later that day, I noticed the difference. A man who had avoided my eyes last week greeted me with a nod. A woman who had whispered behind her hand now offered a gentle smile. It wasn't full vindication, but it was the beginning of truth slipping back into the open. Meanwhile, across town, the consequences were mounting. Without my transfer, December's mortgage had gone unpaid. Collection notices would soon follow. Brooke's polished smile cracked on social media. She posted a photo of their Christmas tree with a caption about toxic family sabotage, claiming they had been betrayed. Instead of sympathy, comments piled in. Weren't those your father-in-law's countertops? And, funny how generosity turns into sabotage when the checks stop. Her audience was turning on her. That afternoon, my phone recorded a voicemail from Brooke, her voice sharp and venomous. She accused me of destroying their reputation, of humiliating her parents, of leaving Ethan broken. "He will never forgive you," she hissed at the end. I pressed delete without replaying it. I had no room left for poison. Richard's call came next. His tone was colder, controlled. He spoke of legal action, of consequences, of connections that could make things very difficult for me. But I knew now how hollow his threats were. My evidence was stronger than his bluster. For once, I did not feel the old weight of intimidation. I felt immune, untouchable. And yet, through it all, the silence from Ethan cut deepest. He did not call, did not write, did not come to my door. I wondered if he was paralyzed by shame, or if he was simply unwilling to stand against Brooke, perhaps both. But his absence pressed heavier than all the threats combined. That evening, I lit a single candle and placed it by Lucia's photograph on the mantel. Her smile in the frame looked softer in the flickering glow. "I stood my ground," I whispered to her. For the first time in years, I felt I had honored not just myself, but her memory too. Outside, snow began to fall again, fine flakes swirling in the wind. Somewhere across town, a notice from the bank was sliding into Ethan's mailbox, stamped delinquent, payment required. Their life, so carefully curated, was beginning to unravel piece by piece. I closed the curtains, poured myself another coffee, and let the knowledge settle. Consequences had arrived, and this was only the beginning. By the first week of January, Santa Fe looked different. The lights that had glittered along Canyon Road were coming down, leaving bare wires and ladders leaned against adobe walls. The holiday glow had faded, and in its place came the gray quiet of winter. It suited my mood perfectly. Less celebration, more reflection. The storm that had erupted over Christmas was still echoing through my life, but I was no longer staggering under it. I was steady now, watching the pieces fall where they belonged. News traveled quickly in a city this size. A neighbor mentioned that Ethan and Brooke had missed another mortgage payment. I didn't react, but that evening I checked the county records myself, the same way I once checked lumber orders. It was there in black and white, notice of default. Their house, the one I had paid into like a second spine, was sliding toward foreclosure. A part of me felt sorrow, for Ethan, not for Brooke, but another part recognized the harsh justice of it. Choices have consequences, and for the first time, those consequences weren't landing on my shoulders. Brooke's desperation came next. My phone rang one night, and her voice spilled into my voicemail. It was different this time. No arrogance, no sneer, just frantic pleading. She begged me to resume the payments just until things stabilize. She spoke of Ethan's stress, of their children's routines, of appearances they had to maintain. She never mentioned gratitude, never once admitted fault. She wanted the money, not reconciliation. I pressed delete without finishing the message. My house stayed quiet, and that quiet felt like strength. The Campbells, once so loud, had gone silent. Richard no longer called with threats. Lillian no longer masked disdain with polite words. Their social circle had turned cold, and their once glittering reputations dimmed. I imagined them sitting in their manicured home, doors closed, phones ringing less often. For years, they had looked down on me as though I were beneath them. Now, silence was their only language. I took quiet satisfaction in it. Ethan, however, did not disappear entirely. One morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox, his handwriting uneven as though written in haste. The letter inside was an apology, but a timid one. He admitted he had let things go too far and should have stood up more. But the words carried no backbone, no defiance against Brooke or her parents. It was half confession, half excuse. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. Sincerity was there in the cracks, but courage was missing. I carried that letter in my jacket pocket as I continued my routines. Twice a week, I still went to St. Francis Church. We sorted food, ladled soup into bowls, passed out bread to families who had little more than hope. There, among strangers, I felt more connection than I had at my own son's table. The children smiled, their parents thanked me, and no one asked me for bank transfers or proof of worth. That small service reminded me of something I had forgotten. Family is not always tied by blood. Sometimes it is chosen, shaped by kindness and respect. One evening, after we had finished serving, I noticed someone standing at the back of the church. Ethan. He lingered in the shadows, watching quietly. He didn't come forward, didn't say a word, but our eyes met for a moment across the room. I saw shame in his expression, and maybe longing too. Then he turned and left before I could call out. My heart tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to sorrow. He was reaching, but not yet ready. Back at home, the old carpenter's toolbox still rested on the shelf in my living room. I hadn't touched it since Christmas Eve. It sat there like a sentinel, reminding me of the night I had stood up for myself. Once it had carried the tools I used to build my son's childhood desk. On Christmas Eve, it carried the evidence that dismantled the illusion of his marriage. Now it was neither weapon nor burden. It was a symbol, proof that I could both build and dismantle, depending on what love required. As January settled deeper, I felt bitterness easing out of me, replaced by clarity. I no longer yearned for Ethan's approval. I no longer believed my worth depended on Brooke's judgment or Richard's threats. For the first time in years, I felt like the man Lucia had loved, solid, independent, unwilling to bow where respect was not returned. One night, after leaving the church, I stepped outside into the sharp cold. Snow crunched under my boots, and from across the plaza, I heard children laughing, their sleds scraping along the packed ice. The sound filled me with something warm. I looked up at the stars scattering across the winter sky and whispered, "Real family is the one that shows up." If you're still watching and sensing the shift toward resolution, drop number 6 in the comments to let me know. Now, let's explore how the path to healing begins. By March, Santa Fe had begun to soften. Snow lingered in the shaded corners of the hills, but the air carried a faint warmth, the kind that hints at spring even while frost still clings to the grass. I had repaired the porch light, repainted the living room, and replaced the cracked tiles in my kitchen. All small things, but each one felt like reclaiming ground I had once abandoned. My finances balanced for the first time in years, and my nights were no longer haunted by the sound of automatic withdrawals. It was during one of those calm evenings, as I sat with a cup of coffee, that a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, shoulders slumped, his once polished appearance disheveled. His jacket was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. The confident son I had known was gone. In his place stood a man hollowed by consequence. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice cracked, heavy with shame. I let him in. He perched on the edge of my couch like a guest afraid to overstay, eyes darting to the fresh paint, the new recliner, the framed photos on the mantel. He looked older, worn thin by months of stress. "The house, it's over. We got the foreclosure notice. 3 months behind. Brooke's furious. Her parents won't take our calls. I don't know what to do." I stayed silent, letting him speak. He swallowed hard. "I chose them over you. I let Brooke talk me into things I should have fought against. And on Christmas..." He stopped, the memory too heavy to name. "I can't believe I said those words to you. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times." I folded my hands, listening. His apology sounded genuine, but sincerity alone could not erase years of choices. "I read through everything you left on the table that night," Ethan continued. "Every statement, every receipt. I saw how blind I was, how much I took from you without even realizing. Dad, I'm ashamed." His eyes welled with tears he tried to hide. For a moment, I looked at him and saw not the man he was now, but the boy who once carried lumber beside me, grinning as though the world was ours to build. That memory pulled at me, but I held firm. "Ethan," I said at last, "I hear your apology, but forgiveness isn't forgetting. What's gone is gone. Money, years, chances. I won't pay your debts. I won't save your house. If you want a relationship with me, it will be built on respect, not transactions." He dropped his gaze to the floor, shoulders trembling. "I know. I don't deserve help. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness." I turned toward the mantel. Lucia's photo caught my eye, her smile eternal, her eyes filled with the warmth I had carried all these years. In my heart, I asked her what she would want me to say. The answer came quietly but firmly. "Forgive, but do not enable." "Your mother used to say," I told him, "that love without respect isn't family. You forgot that. Brooke never understood it, but if you want me in your life again, that's where it starts." He nodded slowly, tears spilling despite his effort to contain them. "Then let me try. Not for money, not for the house, just for us." For the first time in months, I felt a small thaw between us. I walked into the kitchen and poured him a cup of coffee, placing it in front of him. He stared at it like it was a lifeline. That simple gesture, offering coffee instead of cash, meant more than either of us said aloud. We sat for a while, speaking little, the silence no longer heavy with betrayal, but tentative with possibility. Ethan did not ask for money again. He did not beg for the house. He just drank the coffee slowly, his hands wrapped around the cup like it was the only warmth he had left. When he finally rose to leave, his back was straighter than when he had arrived. At the door, he hesitated, then said softly, "I'll earn it, Dad. Somehow." I nodded. "That's all I ask." After he left, I stepped onto the porch. The night smelled of damp earth and the first stirrings of spring. I breathed deeply, feeling lighter than I had in years. The cycle of exploitation was over. Ethan hadn't lost me, he had given me away. Now, if he wanted me back, he would have to earn it. By the time spring settled into Santa Fe, the city felt reborn. Buds began to appear on the cottonwoods near the plaza, and the air carried that faint perfume of damp soil after a long winter. My own house felt lighter too, fresh paint on the walls, small repairs done, and most importantly, a sense of peace I had not known in years. The storm of Christmas had passed, leaving me with scars, yes, but also with clarity. I often found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, the years of sacrifice, every dollar poured into Ethan and Brooke's house, the humiliation of that night when my own son told me, "Get lost, you poor old man," the moment I canceled the transfers and felt a chain loosen, the confrontation on Christmas Eve when I placed the truth in front of their polished guests, the fallout that followed, the foreclosure notices, the collapse of Brooke's facade, Richard's silence, and finally, Ethan's visit, hollowed by consequence but brave enough to ask for a second chance. It had been a long road from humiliation to strength, but I could finally see it clearly. I had not been destroyed. I had been rebuilt. One afternoon, I pulled the old carpenter's toolbox from the shelf. Its wood was scratched and darkened with age, carrying the smell of sawdust from decades ago. It had once held the tools I used to build Ethan's desk when he was a boy, a piece of furniture he once cherished. On Christmas Eve, it had carried evidence that dismantled the lies his wife and her family had spun. Now, it sat empty, but not useless. It had become a symbol, a reminder that I had the power to build or dismantle depending on respect. I set it back in the living room, where I could see it daily. Not to gloat, but to remember. I had learned something hard and undeniable. Blood alone does not define family. Real family shows up. Real family respects boundaries and honors sacrifices. Brooke and her parents had failed that test entirely. Ethan had nearly failed it too, blinded by pride and fear. But his letter, his visit, his quiet gestures of checking in showed there was still a chance for him to earn his way back. I wasn't rushing him. Forgiveness is not forgetting, and rebuilding trust takes time. But the door, though narrow, was open. In the meantime, I found family elsewhere. I spent more evenings at St. Francis, helping in the kitchen, handing bowls of soup to strangers whose gratitude felt more genuine than any thanks I had received at my son's house. On Sundays, Rosa invited me to her table. Her children showed me their school projects, and they called me Uncle Hector. Their laughter filled the empty spaces in my heart. It was not the family I once imagined, but it was family nonetheless, chosen and real. Ethan began to take small steps. He called once a week just to ask how I was. He offered to repaint my shed, something I had been putting off. He didn't speak of money or the house. He spoke of wanting to try. I let those gestures stand. They were small, but they were sincere, and that sincerity was more valuable to me than all the checks I had written before. At night, I often sat by Lucia's photograph, telling her what had happened, as though she were still listening. I told her about Ethan's apology, about Brooke's fall from grace, about the silence of the Campbells. Most of all, I told her that I had stood my ground, that I had finally learned the lesson she had tried to teach me years ago. Love without respect isn't family. She had been right all along. The message I carried now was simple but unshakable. Betrayal may break the heart, but silence and surrender break the soul. Standing firm, even when it means walking away, is not cruelty. It is survival. Forgiveness is not weakness, but enabling is. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are the doors through which love must pass if it is to be real. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I stepped outside. The air was crisp but carried the promise of warmth. Children's laughter rang from down the street, neighbors waved, and I felt connected again, not as a man cast aside, but as a man who had chosen his place. I looked toward the horizon, the sky painted in shades of red and gold, and whispered the truth I had earned. Family is not who shares your name, but who honors your presence, and I will never again be the poor old man told to get lost.